So let's communicate about the climate. I mean, let's climunicate.
I would like to start with one of your statements. I've heard you talk several times about the fact that the policy cart has been put in front of the scientific horses back in the late 80s with the first IPCC and so on. And I followed a lot of your podcast and presentations, so I think I have a very good sense of what the book is about. And I'm referring especially one of your lectures that you gave, and which I believe was strongly based on your book. So I'm drawing mostly from that lecture. And so this also is a statement you made that during that lecture. So we can agree that there's been a strong debate starting in the late 80s, but I'd like you to reflect also perhaps on what happened before. I mean, are we disregarding some of the what happened in terms of scientific discoveries since 1950s with Eunice and Newton, Freud, when they discovered that the CO2 or greenhouse gases were affecting the temperature, and then Arrhenius. So that was more than 150 years ago. And then the history about what Exxon found out in the late 60s, so it was 20 years before, which is that they found out that there is a connection between the emissions and the climate change, particularly temperature change, and really this is basic physics, isn't it? I mean, it's not we didn't have to wait until the late 80s to know that there was this connection.
Okay, the issue is this: we've known about the so-called greenhouse effect for more than 150 years. We understand the basic physics of the CO2's infrared emission spectra. We've known that for a very long time, but that doesn't tell us anything about the most consequential issues, like the sensitivity of the climate to CO2 emissions. Even, there's still a factor of 3 uncertainty in this most basic parameter, even according to the IPCC. So this is not driven by science. This is driven by, starting in the 50s, the United Nations, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundations, a number of different organizations, had this neo-Malthusian perspective on the world. They were anti-capitalist. The population was too large, and they thought the only way we can solve these problems is some sort of world government through the UN. And they saw environmental issues as the perfect vehicle to push these ideas, and specifically climate change. Once they got a cadre of, top climate scientists to support this and push this with them, and then it started taking off in the 1980s. So right from the very beginning, this was driven by a specific worldview and a policy agenda. And I hate to say it, but some leading scientists became useful idiots for this agenda. And, when the IPCC was formed, its mandate was to look only at dangerous human-caused climate change, not to look at natural variability, not to look at any benefits from CO2, not to look at any benefits from warming, but only to look at dangerous human-caused climate change. So it's a very specific political agenda that has framed this issue for many decades now. And this is a framework, and the national governments have chimed in. All the funding in this area goes to support research that supports this particular agenda. And, people who are talking about natural climate variability, the sun, land use, all these kind of things are very much marginalized. And if you talk too much about uncertainty or natural variability, you just get called a denier. And that's the sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in. Science has been thrown under the bus for this political agenda and for the self-aggrandizement and careerism of certain climate scientists who become activists. So to me, that's a very bad situation for science. And people who are seriously trying to understand and manage climate risk are just left with a bunch of garbage because we're not asking the right questions. We're not focused on the right things. So it's a bad state of affairs. Like I said, I wrote my book, Climate Uncertainty and Risk, to try to lay all this out and to try to map out a way forward that makes sense in terms of supporting human flourishing while at the same time supporting environmental objectives.
Okay, thank you. I think that clarifies pretty well your point of view, and I appreciate very much your book and the discussions that have arisen from that book. And like I said, that there's been so many interviews and so on that have been very very useful and very interesting. However, we also need to balance it with a lot of other literature, as you would appreciate, starting from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change reports. I mean, they may be flawed in some way, as people say, but ultimately this is a collection of all the knowledge of of what we.
Yeah. But what my book does is say, yeah, people disagree. There's a great deal of uncertainty and people disagree. There's a broad spectrum. Okay. We don't need to say this person is right, that person's wrong. We need to use that as information, that there's disagreement and there's uncertainty as part of the information in our risk assessment and risk management strategies. So we don't have to, I'm not saying my take on the science is right. Okay. I don't assert is right. What I do assert is that the only way that we can sensibly deal with this in a policy perspective, it's a wicked problem about a deeply complex system, is to apply the principles of 21st century risk science to assessing and managing this problem, rather than militant consensus enforcement and the precautionary principle. That is just a wrong fit for this problem.
Yeah, like I said, I fully agree with you that it's a very complex problem. But if we also look at the history of the discussions, I think there are many discussions, but I'd like to focus for now just mostly on the IPCC and particularly the COPs, the conferences of parties. And as you may know, there are tens of thousands of people who participate in the discussions, and they've been going on for nearly 30 years now. We had the 28th COP last year, so it's a very long process. And if it was indeed a simplistic solution, as I think I heard you say, it wouldn't have taken so long to get to where we are. And actually, we are not there yet because
they have a solution, net zero. The problem is it's politically, technologically, and economically infeasible. So it's something that doesn't make sense, but they keep pushing it for decades. So it's just they're doing something that makes no sense.